I love the idea of beginner versus tactical.
Rather than have home and away games, have like a festival of women's football and take it on tour around the UK.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit Podcast, the show for people shaping the future of sport. Driven by my curiosity working in the industry, I've brought together leading executives to host conversations with decision makers across innovation, marketing, media, finance, and performance, unpacking their strategies and industry shaping ideas.
So I think we've talked about this in the past and even just in chats. Obviously, it's a very hot topic. In the US, I think you see Omaha Productions has sort of like cornered this market of the altcast or the second screen broadcast, etc. But I just find that to be a very interesting concept, and how it evolves, I'm fascinated by. So obviously we've all seen, or maybe you haven't, but in the US during football season, there's your normal broadcasters and then the Manning brothers do their Manning cast. And it's way more of like chilling in the living room. They bring on guests. They're kind of just talking and telling stories. It's essentially an athlete podcast with rights is what it is. And I think there's not even I'm curious, this is less a pitch and more open for discussion of what exactly, like, what do we go to from that? Is it director's cuts? And it's sort of this blend of athlete-led media and broadcast rights. So to take another example, Games with Names is a podcast that I really enjoy. It's with Julian Edelman, if you are familiar with it. And they bring on guests to recap and talk through huge games in the past. So if you can imagine that as like archived altcast, essentially, then you have live altcast. Where do we go to from there in terms of just like, what do people actually want to see? Is it way more stat driven that ESPN has started to invest some money in? Is it way more personality driven? I'm of the opinion, obviously working in athlete led media, that I feel like personality driven alternate broadcasts will not go away anytime soon. I'm curious if that's something that you see a lot in the UK. Like, do you see alternate broadcasts, whether it's on YouTube? Obviously, Goldbridge is a big example, but I don't know. What are your initial takes on the alternate broadcast boom?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've seen a few, right? Like there was a ton of LinkedIn thought leadership around the Bundesliga doing their deals in the UK with both Mark Goldbridge, but also with Gary Lineker and the rest is football. I think like those deals got a lot of publicity. I think La Liga also did something where they gave rights to be streamed or for highlights to be shown within podcasts. So like you're getting a bit of it. I think where there's been some pushback since the initial positive publicity is like how aligned are the audiences in terms of like, do the people that watch Mark Goldbridge actually have any interest in the Bundesliga? And like, has that actually created new fandom for the Bundesliga? Because I think it could be easy to just go to the person with the biggest following versus the person with the most authentic overlap. So like, is there a football creator in the UK that maybe doesn't have the reach of a Mark Goldbridge, but more authentically aligns with the messaging and the kind of like values, I guess, of the Bundesliga? So I like, that's not to knock Goldbridge, like he's built an incredible audience and like maybe that works for them in terms of what they are hoping to get out of the partnership in terms of just raw numbers. But yeah, I wonder if there's something where, you know, streaming with a lesser creator that has like a really niche following and like maybe his audience is only 10,000, but it's like really, really engaged. Like, I wonder if there's ways to syndicate to kind of like a broader creator strategy where instead of being with like one or two massive creators, which I guess is probably the easier thing from a logistics perspective, like maybe there's a better micro streamer strategy where you could be partnering with like 50 creators that have like more authentic ties, but like deeper and smaller like audiences maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I haven't really seen. I'm trying to think of a good example. I have actually perfect. I'll go back to Major League Baseball for a sec. I'm an out of market Mets fan living in Boston. So I sign up for MLB TV, and when you pay for the subscription there, you can choose to watch either broadcast, the Mets home broadcast or whatever the away team broadcast was. I have not yet seen that as like alt broadcast of two take niche creators that one is a fan of one team, one is a fan of the other team, and you create sort of like the personality driven but fan centric. Speaking of like authenticity, what if there's a German Englishman that loves Bayern, lives in England, lives in London, has a huge and can speak to both like living in England and following footy around the world, but also German roots and Bayern narratives and all that kind of stuff. And then they're playing, I don't know, they're playing Red Bull Leipzig and like another creator that is known to be a Leipzig fan, and those are the two streams that you could potentially watch. Like to me, that feels way more authentic than let's go after the biggest personality in a different country that happens to also like the sport in general. But who knows? I mean, obviously it's much easier. And yeah, I just haven't seen that before. So I think that could be interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really good that the leagues are trying to do new things and to reach new audiences. Like it will take time, right? Like maybe people that watch Mark Goldbridge right now aren't Bundesliga fans, but maybe if he does it for a year or 2 years, then maybe they do become Bundesliga fans. So like I don't want to speak too soon in terms of writing it off. It's an interesting strategy to go after. I just think that there's probably a strategy which touches on more interest points. So I wouldn't even limit it to two, right? Like I think you can basically identify what the different personality types are of fan and then have a creator that speaks to each of them, right? So like there might be someone that wants the fanatical Bayern fan that's going to just give you a really biased view from a Bayern perspective. And like as a Spurs fan, like sometimes when Alan Smith was early in his commentary days, he was like very obviously anti-Spurs because he's an ex-Arsenal player, and like it kind of like annoyed you to have to listen to him as the lead commentator. Or for example, like a lot of the pundits in the Sky team are ex-Man United players. So if Spurs play Man United, the commentary at halftime, if Man United are losing, is all about how bad Man United are, not how good like Tottenham have been to be ahead, that kind of thing. Which so like I can understand it from that perspective, and I think there's probably unofficial versions of it. Like I've heard that there are people that will just like mute the TV and just have like a YouTube streamer on instead. I've never tried that, but like I've heard that that's something that some people do. But yeah, I think I would almost be trying to segment the audiences more and say like not just home fan and away fan, but like maybe there's one stream that's like super in-depth, like tactical analysis, and they're like breaking things down at a really, really high level. And you're like watching it almost like getting the feed that like an actual football coach would want to listen to. Whereas like maybe there's also a beginner version of that where like if for example I was watching baseball, I have no clue what's going on, right? Like I don't know the rules of baseball. So like is there a deal that the MLB could do with a cricket personality where it's a cricketer commentating on it, but like he's using analogies from the world of cricket so that like for cricket fans that want to get into baseball, there's an analogy that I understand because he's able to kind of like describe how what just happened is similar to a run out in cricket. Or I think that's where I think there could be more depth to Altcast than there currently is. And maybe there's like a strategy within these leagues where the first step is announce the big creator because that's the thing that's easiest to get across the line. And they have a view to do this down the line, but it's just like you have to work in baby steps within any kind of big organization. So I don't want to say like I know more than them or that I coming up with some brand new idea that they'd never have thought of. But I think there should hopefully be a pathway towards something that where, regardless of your type of fandom, you can find a stream that reflects that. Like everything will be super personalized.
I could not agree more. I feel like we're going to have to say this all the time is like, hey, I have this idea. But by the way, there are a lot of people that are smarter than us, and we're not saying this is what should be going on.
And like I know from speaking to people at these organizations that like quite often what their initial objective is, it doesn't end up being reflected because it goes through so many stakeholders that like what you end up seeing as the final result isn't necessarily the initial idea. And there may be other parts to it that you just don't see. So I think it's easier to criticize versus to kind of understand the nuance of it. I think on the flip side, I'm curious what your take is on this. Like, we've also had, I guess, like decades of social media algorithms personalizing everything so that we never see anything outside of our own comfort zone. So I guess my one pushback to that kind of like direction of travel is maybe sometimes you should sit with your discomfort and actually have to experience something where you don't agree with absolutely everything that's being told to you. And I guess my one worry would be that you end up with like these really extremist fans where they're only ever hearing their side of the debate. And so you kind of create these alternate realities, I guess, where you've got certain people that just believe like that the world's out to get them, that the referees are all conspiring to relegate them or to stop them winning the title. And they never hear any kind of voice of reason because they're just tuning out of anything that's not speaking directly to their opinions and what they want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, you took the words out of my mouth. When we talk about like personalized streams and if there's multiple options, et cetera, like my head immediately went to, well, not only is that the trend in which algorithms are going, but like, man, that sounds like some serious echo chambers for people that should probably get a bit of some alternate opinions. So yes, I completely agree. I mean, unfortunately, I don't think that is the larger general consensus. Like we are spiraling, maybe sounds negative, but we are definitely leaning towards silos and quasi echo chambers when it comes to fandom and online choice of audiences. I mean, the idea of who is your audience versus who are you choosing to listen to, it just becomes very murky. And honestly, I feel like we could all do with a bit more of just like at least hearing some other fandom kinds of sides of things. Absolutely, when it comes to like diehard fans of one side versus another. I love the idea of beginner versus tactical. And I think that is something that could be so interesting, even for people interested. Like you could get everybody from, I think I know a lot about the sport and I want to hear the scouting director type tactical cam and commentary, to I'm a college student and I'm kind of interested in the sporting operations side of things. I want to watch this every week. Like there's really, it almost blends like professional interest and personal interest, which could be super fun. And then to your cricket point, like I feel like that should absolutely be something. I've actually seen a bunch of clips recently on. I really wish altcasts were made for beginners of fans. I feel like that could open up a lot of opportunity for both leagues and broadcasters, but just like become a little less gatekept and speak to the general audience a little more. It's a great idea.
Yeah, I think that idea of opening up to wider audiences by translating things that are basically going to keep them out is where there is definitely an opportunity, like a cricket streamer translating baseball terms, right? Or someone that's not watched the sport before explaining it using Taylor Swift analogies, right? Like there could be ways of doing it where if you're aware that there's a certain audience that's trying to reach your product, then is there a way for you to facilitate that so you can on-ramp them? And then on the flip side, I would assume if an American lives in the UK and is listening to the NFL stream on the BBC, they're probably like, this is painful to listen to because they're explaining everything. So basically, because they like people in the UK, they're going to be speaking as if everyone is a beginner, right? So there's going to be some hardcore NFL fans in the UK that are like, I don't get the authentic NFL experience because I want them to go into more depth than basically like the BBC is going to be comfortable to do in order to address the kind of mass market. So I think, yeah, I would be very interested in how you can scale up and down based on kind of like level of insight and knowledge that you're kind of, and how to kind of like relatability, I guess, is the other one. But yeah, you also have to be careful not to create something where everyone's getting their own version of it, because I think sport is one of the few things that still exists where it becomes a water cooler moment because everyone has watched the same match. And so it's something to talk about, right? Like I read an interesting article a while back in The Guardian where it was talking about the fact that like streaming has killed TV for a lot of people, because like a lot of the reason you'd watch reality show is so that you could then talk about the episode with your friends. But if you're on episode 7 and they're only on episode 3, then you don't have anyone to talk to it about. So you can't discuss it in the same way. You kind of lose the social element of watching TV. It becomes isolating because if you're ahead of someone or behind someone, you're actually tuning out of interacting with your friends because you don't want to hear something that's going to spoil it for you. And so like sport's one of the only things that being live and all of the value coming from kind of like the excitement of watching it live, at least to begin with, want to make sure that if the commentator says something controversial, that's almost like a talking point, right, for people to discuss. So if you're both not getting the same commentary, then maybe that actually isolates people in some way and removes some of that social experience.
Totally. I feel like you and I maybe have had a convo about this, but it's like the old HBO Game of Thrones on Sunday night type situation. Like everybody knows, this was also before COVID, everybody knows you go into the office Monday morning and 95% of the office is walking in excited to talk about last night's episode.
Yeah.
And that just feels, we're getting back to that, I feel like in certain shows. But you're right. The only other instance where that holds the same, at one moment in time, cultural sway is live sports, which is really interesting.
Yeah, there's a show in the UK called Traitors which does that as well, where like everyone's discussing it and like it will be getting discussed on the radio, and so like everyone tunes in to watch it live. And so I think there's like a craving for that, where people want something to talk about with their friends. And I guess your social media experience isn't something where you're able to like be that social, right? Because it's all very insular. But in general, I like the idea of altcast. I think there's something quite interesting there. I think as well, from a commercial perspective, becomes quite interesting for rights holders because you could sell different sponsorship packages based on the type of audience that's going to be watching, right? So like if you have a really technical audience, then for the baseball, for example, then maybe it's like you're pushing stuff like accountancy software, right? Where it's like people that really like are into numbers and finance and all that stuff. And then maybe for the beginner audience, you're selling stuff and personalizing the advertising in a way that like resonates with a different audience. So I think the secondary point is like, how does that help you carve up new sponsorship inventory or better sell through to the right people?
Absolutely. And then going back to sort of tying this to the start, it feels like that, I guess we can come to an evolution of this. The ideal person, take your cricket baseball example, would be a really well-known, charismatic cricket personality that headlines that broadcast, but can speak to a beginner audience versus theoretically having just like a broadcaster that is being told, hey, speak to the general audience. And you can actually tie the personality driven and like talent driven nature of multiple broadcasts to types of audiences, not necessarily their audience only, which I really like.
Yeah, I think it works both ways, right? It's like, how does leveraging that creator or personality bring new audiences to the sport or to the rights holder? And then also, how does that rights holder benefit the creator by bringing new audiences to that creator, right? Like, I think it can kind of go a little bit both ways. Like, there's a value exchange on both sides.
This podcast is produced by O6, but more than just being a production partner, they're also active members of the Sports Pundit community. Having seen the work they're doing across the industry up close, working with leading F1 teams and Premier League clubs, as well as top creators, I'm so delighted to now have them on board and helping to elevate this show to a new level.
So essentially, I was having a conversation with someone around the WSL, the Women's Super League in the UK, because I'm really curious about how they could innovate more on the format. And so I was just keen to get their opinion on it, right? Because I think as far as women's football has gone generally, like it's grown quite a bit, but it's very much in the image of its male counterparts at the moment, right? They play home and away. They play 90 minutes. They play a lot of the same teams, right? Like there's only, I think, one team in the WSL that isn't associated directly with a men's team. And I just think there's an opportunity to innovate slightly more. And so my question was basically, is home and away fixtures actually the best model for sport, or is that just like what we've grown up with? And so could you freshen up and create a much more compelling product within the women's game if you were to move away from some stuff that's kind of taken as gospel when it comes to the men's side of things? And I think the secondary point on this is kind of a more practical one, which is the WSL has a fairly low average attendance, but then it also has some really, really high record numbers. So you have this really stark contrast between the haves and the have-nots when it comes to the women's game, right? So you have Arsenal playing in front of 60,000 people, albeit that there's a discounted price on the tickets versus what they would charge for a men's game. But you get 60,000 people and they play all of their home games at the Emirates. But then you have other teams like West Ham United, for example, who play at Dagenham and Redbridge, which is a 6,000 capacity stadium, and they have an average attendance of about 1.6K. So like, I think the challenge is like there's an infrastructural one, right? Like you're either playing in front of like 1,000 or 60,000, and there isn't really that many stadiums in the UK that accommodate something in the middle. And so I was thinking about it, and I think one potential opportunity, rather than have home and away games, have a festival of women's football and take it on tour around the UK. So, there's 12 teams in the WSL, so 6 matches. So have like all 6 matches happen across one weekend in one stadium, right? So you have a Friday night game, then maybe 3 games on the Saturday and 2 on the Sunday. And you position it more akin to something like when the NFL comes to the UK, and it's kind of like a celebration of the sport rather than like people having to be a direct fan of a given team. And the reason I think that's interesting is because a lot of fandom in women's football hasn't yet translated from a national team fandom to the clubs, right? So there's loads of people that watch the Lionesses and care about the Lionesses, but I wouldn't say that many of them yet follow that fandom through the same Lionesses when they're playing for their clubs. So I think if you can pitch it as like you're buying a pass to the women's football festival and you're going to get to see 10 of the Lionesses that won the Euros over the course of the weekend performing for their respective teams, you can like potentially present a more interesting package in the short term. And also you only need 1 stadium per week rather than 6 teams all needing a stadium. And so there's some level of economies of scale, right? Like for Arsenal to be putting on the games at the discounted rate they are, I would assume like they're not making that much once you take into account all of the cost that goes into hosting those games at home every single other week. So you only have that burden once or twice a season in terms of like the cost side of things. But every week is in front of a fully packed crowd in a big stadium because they're there for the whole thing, right? Like it's almost like sold like a music festival, right? Like you kind of buy your way into the whole thing or just a day. So I'm curious, like if you think that there's something to that.
I was just looking through a bunch of the discussion on it, and I love it in general. I think the first thing that came to mind was, so yes, you pick a big stadium. I guess you are hoping and you're under the assumption that the larger teams fill out that stadium for like the day pass or whatever. But don't you also then run into an issue of you either need big versus small for every game, which would then lead to a lot of quasi home field advantage, I suppose. Or if you can't do that, then you also, and you can't draw everyone there by the idea of the festival and everything going around it, then you're just bringing people away from their small, intimate fans into big stadiums that are still half full. So I guess there is some risk there, but in the long term, I feel like the festival touring model, great, like sum of all the parts and some of the sport versus club specifically feels great. But in the short term, you're still kind of needing to piggyback off of the big clubs anyway, right? If that's how I'm reading that.
Yeah, I think partly, but I think also there are currently fans of women's football that don't have a team. So like the same way that like when the Premier League goes and does its summer series in the US, it actually also does these like package deals where it will sell you Man United, West Ham, but also like Bournemouth v Everton as like a package, and you're like watching the product based on the fact that it's like Premier League football. And so like I think really the heavy lifting has to come from the WSL brand and like making people a fan of the WSL first, and then like team fandom comes later. The same way that like the Jacksonville Jaguars versus whoever will sell out, and like there'll be people there wearing jerseys of teams that aren't playing, right? Like I think we're so early in that journey that like before we try and build like tribal club fandom, which can exist still, I think what you need to build beyond that is just like exposure to it, where people are getting physical experiences of interacting with women's football. And like I think really the piggybacking comes from like, how do you get those Lioness fans that like don't have a team to be like, yeah, I'll come along for a weekend of women's football or a day of women's football because it's a fun day out with my friends, or it's like something interesting to do. And so, yeah, I would say yes to a degree, but I think that there's enough people at the moment that don't have an affiliation to a club. And if anything, like affiliating to a club is almost intimidating at this point because they don't necessarily want to pick a team. Like they just want to watch Ella Toon, or they just want to watch, Leah Williamson, right? Like, but they're not necessarily Arsenal fans. They're just, or Man United fans. They're just fans of like the Lionesses, and they want to see their heroes up close.
Oh, that's kind of interesting. So that was my next question was, do you think it is easier to build fandom of a league versus fandom of a team? But then if you're sort of knowing that fandom starts with players, then you actually bypass team and just say, come watch your players, like irrespective of what team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of thinking it's like the WSL sells itself as like this amazing league with amazing players that play for the teams, but like almost like from a package perspective, you're buying like visibility to all of these players that you're going to get to see, but you're also kind of like WSL is the stamp of approval that this is like a high quality product, right? Like, so WSL kind of becomes like it's like the music festival brand, right? Like it's the Glastonbury, and then the artists are the players. And I think the teams that they play for are like a vehicle in which that's facilitated. But like, I think on the women's fandom side of things, like women generally follow personalities more so than organizations. And so like, I think like generally speaking, fandom of women's football right now, I think is largely 50-50 male, female. And I think that moving to a model like this would encourage more female fandom, which I think a lot of people just assume like, oh, it's women's sport, therefore it's women's fans. And I don't necessarily think that that's true. So I think, yeah, there's certain things that they'll need to overcome, but ultimately I think that there's more upside to be gained. And I'm just thinking like going to this model, like Arsenal just started selling season tickets, right, for the women's side, which is interesting. But I think that's obviously a fairly evolved thing. Like they've been going for 20 years. There's teams in the league that don't have 20 years of kind of effort and growth behind them on the women's side. And so like letting them, like, I think the WSL almost needs to say, like, as an entity, we're here to try and build everyone up. And like some of you are at different points in that journey of building your kind of like fan intensity of fandom, I guess. And so how do we create an environment where if the WSL goes to Liverpool for a week, it sells out like across the 3 days, and like there's people there that are watching, I don't know, London Lionesses versus West Ham, even though it's a game in Liverpool, right? Like, and I'm not necessarily expecting people from London to travel up to Liverpool. I just think like there'll be people in Liverpool that have a curiosity around women's sport and women's football and the players that are involved, that they would come and be part of the day or the 2 days.
I think it's really interesting. I wonder too if there's a deeper level of like some things we know to be tour based and others we assume that they're not, and that could prove to be difficult. For example, like I'd be very curious to talk to people from the PLL about how they switched and what they saw before and after tour based. I think that's super because at a natural level, teams are supposed to be built around local communities. But in you laying that out, I was like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I can 1000% see how it could work and attract not only engaged fans, but a lot of fans. But I'm curious, just in general, like SailGP, a little less local community based just because it's national teams. But do we have some sort of like pre-hardwired assumption that like I am from Boston and I'm not? I'm from the tri-state area, therefore I'm a Mets fan no matter where I go. Or versus, yeah, I am from Liverpool, but a fan of the sport, and whoever is here, I am able to watch. I'm a fan of. I just think that overcoming that feels very interesting in today's day and age. But what we have on our advantage, or what all leagues have to their advantage right now, is to your point, personalities drive fandom.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is like we're both in markets where the domestic leagues are really, really strong. And so like there's a lot of fandom for those clubs. But, you know, there's people in Egypt that are massive fans of Liverpool, or there's people that get up in the middle of the night in Australia to watch Liverpool play, despite not being from Liverpool. And so like they've built a fandom around something that isn't local. And I think Dan Porter at Overtime has a really interesting opinion on like building teams and not necessarily building them around locations. So like they built their teams around like certain vibes or like certain characteristics, I guess, that people want to identify with. And so like you're not a fan of like a Boston team, you're a fan of like you have certain values which make you a fan of a team within the league that stands for those traits, right? And like the players in that team kind of fit those traits and kind of mold those traits. So I think, yes, obviously, the women's teams are linked to locations in terms of like Liverpool FC are playing and Man United are playing. And I don't think we're going to get to a point where that disappears because there's too much heritage and history there that I just don't see a new women's league forming where all the teams are brand new identities. But I don't think that needs to limit us in terms of saying from a scope perspective. Like I know loads of Liverpool fans and I grew up in Portsmouth, right? Like there's people that support Liverpool that are based on the South Coast. So I think, yeah, you can still build fandom all around the country. And I think women's sport has an opportunity to do that and to like almost move away from the tribalism on the men's side of like away fans and home fans having to sit in separate sections. And like, I think that there's a lot that they should be trying to not replicate.
What a wholesome future is just like everyone here for the love of the game. Sounds like a lovely fan experience.
And it also just differentiates it more, right? Like if they really want to attract new audiences and attract brands that don't sponsor the men's game, and like the men's game is in trouble because a lot of the brands that do want to sponsor it are brands that they're now going to ban from being on the shirt, right? You know, alcohol's already banned. And then betting is the other really big one, which is going to be off front of shirt soon. And I think it's like 11 of the Premier League, 10 or 11 of the Premier League teams have betting front of shirt, right? Like I think women's football has an opportunity to build itself around values that mean brands that are consumer facing and in other segments of the market see value in aligning themselves with. And so I just think there's a big opportunity there for a touring model. And I think the reason it works is there's some fan behavior towards home and away, but like it's not that established yet, right? Like the attendance figures for WSL in general are like still fairly low on the whole. You know, teams in the top flight getting under 2,000 people attending a match. I think that allows this to be possible in a way where you couldn't go and do this with men's Premier League football, and you couldn't do this with like rugby or cricket in quite the same way either, because of either the duration of the sport or the fact that it's already got its followers and its traditions, and they're too entrenched and too big. Whereas I think there's still the opportunity to do it in women's football, which I think is a positive.
Absolutely. I actually just had another idea. If you take something from solo sports, so tennis, for example, we don't really talk about it, but tennis is a tour-based model, obviously a tour-based model. And one thing that I think really helps some of the smaller events, but could be taken here, is what if you had, during that week of games, what if it was all open practices and you're not only getting the chance to see your favorite players play against each other, and naturally you still have to overcome some of the tribal club fandom there too, but you're going to be able to see your favorite players up close and practicing. And there's just like an entirely different way of interacting and engaging with your favorite teams, where for that week, practices are all open and there's more autograph signing, there's more meet and greets, there's more ability to watch them practice for tactical reasons. That feels also like something that could level that up a bit. Like I feel like being able to be up close and see players practice. I went to a small tennis tournament over the summer, and one of the first things I said about why it was so great was, "Oh yeah, we were so close to the court and we were seeing people practice, etc." So I feel like maybe that's something too that fits in here.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity here to sell the whole thing, right? Like it's a celebration of the WSL. You could have pop-ups happening across the city that week where it's like the WSL is in town. I also just think a lot of women haven't grown up with the tradition of my Saturday is spent watching football. And so like if you want to bring in more female fans, then there's a higher likelihood of doing so. If you're saying like, if you're a woman based in Liverpool, let's just keep using that as the example. If you're a woman in Liverpool and you have some recollection that the Lionesses won the Euros because it was all over the BBC, but like you don't really follow football and like you've never really engaged with football. Maybe your partner is a big fan, but like you kind of have never really bothered. A one-off weekend where women's football is in town and there's like a whole festival around it and there's music and there's like close-ups and there's pop-ups that are educating you about the players that play in the league and who they are as personalities. Like you're more likely to do like that one-off event where you could say to your friends like, hey, let's all go along to this WSL thing over the weekend. And like that's not meant to be patronizing. I just think like there's a big opportunity, there's a bigger market there, right? Like you're still going to get the fanatical fans of women's football going because like they want to watch and they'll still come. But I just think if you want to attract audiences that have never engaged in home and away, watching the rain, to get the last train home out of Euston Station back up to Liverpool because the game kicked off at 8 p.m. or whatever. And like, there's a lot of struggle that comes with being a male football fan, like a lot of hardship, which I think is like
the quote right there. That is the quote. But no, you're right. You're absolutely
right. Hardship. Also hardship. No, I just think that you could just make it like so much easier and fan first. Like, and you get people like I live in Milton Keynes, which doesn't have a Premier League football team, but they have an amazing stadium. Like I could imagine if you did a women's football festival hosted at their stadium, which is like a 30,000, maybe 30,000 seat stadium. They host games during the international tournaments. I feel like loads of people will come out for it. Like I feel like it would sell out because they don't get sport that often. Like they don't get like top level sport that often. Whereas like London's kind of spoiled for it. So there's less.
There's a lot of little aspects that as an event or more event organizer than even like marketing or brand marketing for a league that you can do things like what regions or towns don't have a profession. Like imagine big college football towns in the US, huge football fandom, but no NFL teams, for example. If you had pro and you could replicate that for other sports, like where do you see the fandom for the sport exist, but for lack of a better term, like relatively starved for it? And that's where you place your tour. What has, honestly, really good views and is good for pictures, and what has a local, really popular attraction or brand or things like that that you can start to pepper in throughout, that all of these things sum up to a really nice fan experience, feels very doable.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically build it from like fan experience first. And like to your point around, and we don't really have time to go into it more, but like a lot of the discussion today is around European leagues taking matches abroad, right? Like, so Barcelona playing a game in Miami and AC Milan in Perth. And I think the other opportunity here is like, do you have 1 week of the season, which is an international week, where you take it abroad? There's probably a lot of fandom for Man United or Liverpool or Chelsea in the US. There's already an attractiveness and a following for women's soccer in the US. So if you were to have a week of the WSL season where they play at stadiums across the US, and it's a chance for people to watch Chelsea and it's a chance for people to watch Man United, it could actually become like another touch point for those clubs with an important market for them. So I just think there's so many opportunities for something like this to exist. And I'm sure there's a lot of reasons why it would be difficult, but I don't think that should stop people from trying to at least consider alternatives to the status quo.
Well said. Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and each sport represents different ways to handle that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to be fair, like, I think the international thing should be a minor point. Like, I don't think you should suddenly try and take the WSL on a global tour. I think it still needs to be largely domestic, but maybe one weekend it's like a US fixture, or you go and play in Dublin, because a lot of the Irish following is towards the Premier League because they don't really have a strong domestic league in Ireland. And it's a pretty easy commute to go over to Dublin, right? So I think you could do something interesting there. But in general, I think you still need to keep it domestic. You still need to figure out how you build local community and talent pathways. I still think that there's value in them having their homes, and like maybe you have fan club screenings in every home city when it's on the road, so that there's like a local option for people. If it's not being, even if it is being broadcast, I think that's still something worth doing. But yeah, we should probably try to be a little bit more creative when it comes to sports that are emerging and trying to build new audiences. Like, don't do it the same way that's always.
I mean, the last thing I just thought of in hearing you say, and you can take tour-based model and fan weeks in so many different ways, but like, I just had a thought around the FIFA windows and the US men's national team playing a few different games throughout the country. Obviously, you try to reward various cities and you can play in different places, whatever. But what if for friendly windows, when you're playing 2 games in the span of 6 days or whatever it is, you just set up shop in one city and that changes per window, and you have multiple games in the same stadium or at least same city. You do everything again for the fan, versus fans of the US are probably not traveling around. I mean, there probably are some diehards that are saying, oh, let me fly to Nashville and then let me fly to New York. But what if it was all in one place? Again, some open practices. You have the other teams coming into there. I mean, obviously, that is very different than the club model we're talking about, especially for the WSL. But there's an idea too around friendlies, make them matter to the fan versus just upcharging them in random cities. And there's a cool opportunity there, I feel like.
Yeah. And to the point around the national side of things, like, I think that's where the fandom is in women's football right now. So like, it's how do you tap into that? Like, maybe there's ex Lionesses that you can have on the ground in the city doing some of these engagements, because obviously you can't ask too much of the current playing staffs, but like, there's probably an appetite amongst the kind of like recently retired women's players where the commercials opportunities within women's football haven't been amazing. And so the ability for them to maybe make some money and cash in on the newfound interest of the sport is actually a chance to give back to the women that have set up the current platform. So I think there's a nice way to frame it in terms of like how you build on the existing legacy of the sport without completely throwing it away. But we're out of time, so I'll stop talking now. If people have ideas on this, or like how it could be bettered or applied, or why it makes no sense at all, I'd be curious to continue it. Like, we already discussed it a little bit in the WhatsApp group, but I think there's probably more legs on it.
I'm most curious, and please shut up, and it makes zero sense, and I would love to hear why.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Pundit podcast, kindly produced by the amazing team at O6. I'll include more information about the guests and the topics covered in the show notes. Head to sportspundit.co to find previous editions, access the newsletter, and to sign up for our WhatsApp group and see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.